3 ascend, 500 miles from the nearest shoreline and deep inside the USS Gerald R. Ford. 5,000 sailors are wide awake, maintaining over 70 aircraft in a steel cavern the size of 5 football fields, sealed from daylight, sealed from the world. Everyone talks about the flight deck. Nobody talks about what's underneath it. The hangar bay is where this ship actually lives, and what happens inside it will completely change how you see naval power. Most people, when they picture an aircraft carrier, picture the flight deck jets launching, arresting wires snapping, controlled chaos under an open sky. But strip away that image, drop one level down through a maze of ladders and watertight hatches, and you enter a completely different world. The hangar bay of the USS Gerald R. Ford, hull classification CVN-78, is the beating industrial heart of the most powerful warship ever built. It is not glamorous. It is not cinematic. But without it, every single aircraft on this ship stays on the ground. The hangar bay on Ford-class carriers stretches approximately 820 feet long, 108 feet wide, and 25 feet high, a floor area equivalent to roughly 5 NFL football fields laid end to end. All of it enclosed in steel, all of it below the waterline of public perception. The structural steel framework of the hangar alone exceeds 10,000 tons. When the carrier is not actively conducting flight operations, between 60 and 70% of the entire Air Wing F/A 18E/F Super Hornets, EA 18G Growlers, E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes, MH-60R/S, Seahawks is packed inside this space, wing folded, chained down, and attended to around the clock. You're not looking at a storage room. You're looking at a pressurized, continuously operating industrial complex that happens to float. Now pull the camera down to ground level. Meet a petty officer, third-class aviation machinist mate, rate AD in Navy terminology, 22 years old, somewhere in the middle of a 12-hour maintenance shift. His workspace is a patch of non-skid steel deck, approximately 30 feet from the port side of an FA-18E Super Hornet. He has not seen natural daylight in 4 days. The hangar bay has no windows, no skylights, no connection to the sky above except through the massive sliding bay doors on the ship's sides, and those are sealed when the sea state is above a certain threshold. The air around him carries the unmistakable chemical signature of JP5 jet fuel mixed with hydraulic fluid and metal shavings. This is his normal. Here's where the engineering becomes brutally unforgiving. That 25-foot ceiling clearance sounds generous until you remember that an FA-18E Super Hornet has a wingspan of 44 feet and 8 inches when fully spread. In the hangar bay, every single aircraft must have its wings folded using the onboard hydraulic wing fold system before it can be moved or parked. The folded wingspan drops to approximately 27 feet and 6 inches, which gives handlers roughly 1 foot of clearance on each side when moving the aircraft past certain structural columns. One miscommunication, one incomplete wing fold confirmation, and the leading edge of a $67 million aircraft makes contact with a steel beam at 3 miles per hour. That is not a scratch. That is a Class A mishap investigation. The Ford-class carrier is equipped with 4 aircraft elevators, designated number 1 through number 4, each capable of lifting approximately 130,000 pounds, roughly 59 metric tons, from the hangar deck to the flight deck in under a minute. These are not backup systems. They are the circulatory system of the entire air wing. If elevator number 2, positioned on the starboard side aft, goes offline due to a hydraulic failure or electrical fault while the ship is 500 miles from the nearest port, every aircraft below that needs to launch stays below. Sortie generation rates collapse, mission timelines slip, and the maintenance officer, a lieutenant commander, is now explaining to the air boss why the flight schedule is being rewritten from scratch. Think about that for a moment. 12 hours, no windows, the constant vibration of a nuclear reactor 2 decks below your feet, the smell of fuel that never leaves your clothes, the weight of knowing that a single procedural mistake on your part could ground an entire squadron. Could you do that day after day in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Before we go further, if you never knew a hangar bay this size even existed, you're exactly who this channel is made for. Hit like and subscribe. Right now, it costs you nothing, and it tells us to keep pulling back the curtain. But here's the thing, we've only talked about the physical structure. We haven't talked about the people crammed inside it, operating under a color-coded hierarchy so precise that wearing the wrong jacket can get someone killed. So, what does that system actually look like up close? The Air Department aboard a Ford-class carrier is not a department in any conventional sense of the word. It is a self-contained military organization operating inside a military organization, with approximately 2,500 personnel assigned across multiple functional divisions. Those divisions are designated by the letter VVI. One controls the flight deck, V2 owns the catapults and arresting gear, and V3, the division that concerns us right now, owns the hangar bay. Every aircraft movement, every maintenance cycle, every fuel load, and weapons configuration that happens below the flight deck runs through V3. These sailors operate on a 12 hours on, 12 hours off rotation that does not pause for weekends, does not pause for holidays, and does not pause because the sea is rough and everyone feels sick. At the individual level, consider an aviation boatswain's mate equipment, rate ABE, Petty Officer Second Class, 20 years old. His primary function in the hangar bay is aircraft handling, directing the physical movement of aircraft using standardized hand signals and coordinating with tow tractor operators to reposition jets within the crowded deck. There is no radio communication for most of this work. It is hand signals, eye contact, and institutional trust. An F/A 18E Super Hornet weighs approximately 33,000 pounds empty. When a tractor is pushing it or wrestling it at walking speed through a tight corridor between two other parked aircraft, the ABE directing that movement is the last human checkpoint before metal meets metal. One misread signal, one moment of hesitation, and the horizontal stabilizer of one aircraft intersects with the wing of another. The investigation starts before the sound has finished echoing off the hangar walls. On the hangar deck of a Navy carrier, your jersey color is not a uniform accessory, it is your identity, your authority, and your warning label all at once. Yellow jerseys belong to aircraft handling officers and plane directors. They own the movement of every aircraft on the deck. Green jerseys are worn by chock and chain crews, the personnel responsible for securing aircraft to the deck with wheel chocks and tie-down chains rated to 25,000 pounds, a force per chain. Red jerseys mark ordnance crews and crash and salvage teams, the people handling live weapons and responding to emergencies. Purple jerseys, universally called grapes, belong to aviation fuels personnel, managing JP5 fuel systems under pressure. White jerseys are safety officers and medical personnel. In a space this loud, this crowded, and this kinetic, a color-coded visual system is not bureaucratic formality. It is the difference between a coordinated operation and a catastrophic one. Every single morning, before flight operations begin, the entire V3 division participates in a procedure called FOD walk-down, foreign object debris walk-down. Every available sailor lines up shoulder to shoulder across the full width of the hangar bay and walks slowly from one end to the other. Eyes on the deck, picking up any loose material they find. A bolt, a safety wire fragment, a dropped tool, a broken piece of non-skid coating. This is not optional. This is not symbolic. A single 3/8-inch steel bolt ingested into a running General Electric F4 14- GE-400 turbofan engine, the engine that powers the F/A-18E/F, can cause catastrophic compressor blade failure. Engine replacement costs approximately $3.5 million. FOD walkdown costs 20 minutes of everyone's time. The math is not complicated. There's one more environmental factor that gets almost no public attention: heat. When maintenance crews are running engine ground tests inside the hangar bay, a necessary procedure for diagnosing mechanical issues. The local air temperature near the engine exhaust can reach 110 degrees Fahrenheit and above. In an enclosed steel space with limited ventilation, heat accumulates faster than it dissipates. Heat casualties, dehydration, heat exhaustion, and in extreme cases, heat stroke, are a documented occupational risk in hangar bay operations. Sailors are required to maintain mandatory water intake schedules, and senior chiefs watch their people for early signs of heat illness with the same vigilance they watch for mechanical faults. Here's a question worth sitting with on a ship where 5,000 people live and work in the same steel hull. The color of your jacket communicates more about who you are and what authority you hold than your name ever could. Does that system sound extreme to you, or does it start to make perfect sense? So when everything is functioning correctly, the human system inside this hangar is already operating at the absolute edge of controlled chaos. Now ask yourself this: what happens when a fire ignites inside that sealed steel box, 20 feet below the surface of the ocean, with $70 million worth of fueled aircraft parked 30 feet away? On July 29, 1967, the USS Forrestal CV-59 was operating in the Gulf of Tonkin when a single Mk-32 Zuni unguided rocket accidentally discharged from an F-4 Phantom II parked on the flight deck. The rocket crossed the deck and struck the external fuel tank of an A-4 Skyhawk. Within seconds, JP-5 fuel was burning across the deck. Within minutes, the fire had spread below to the hangar bay. By the time the last flame was extinguished, 134 sailors were dead, 161 were injured, 21 aircraft were destroyed, and damage totaled approximately $72 million, equivalent to roughly $600 million in today's money. The entire disaster was triggered by a single electrical fault lasting less than half a second. The United States Navy has never forgotten that number 134. Every damage control doctrine written since 1967 has that fire somewhere in its foundations. Now bring that history into the present. A damage controlman, petty officer. Second class rate DC is one of the most quietly essential people aboard a carrier. When a fire alarm sounds in the hangar bay, while every instinct in every other sailor is pulling them toward the exit, the DC team is moving toward the fire. They do this wearing a proximity suit and self-contained breathing apparatus that together weigh approximately 30 pounds, with visibility inside a smoke-filled hangar bay sometimes reduced to less than 3 feet. Interior temperatures near a JP-5 fuel fire can reach 400 degrees Fahrenheit at head height within the first 2 minutes. ADC Petty Officer Second Class, 23 years old, maybe the only thing standing between a contained fire and a catastrophic chain reaction involving fueled, armed aircraft parked 60 feet away. JP-5 jet fuel was specifically chosen for carrier aviation over the older JP-4 formulation. For one critical reason, its flashpoint. The minimum temperature at which it produces ignitable vapors is at least 140 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to JP-4's flashpoint of around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. In theory, JP-5 is significantly harder to accidentally ignite, which matters enormously in an enclosed hangar packed with fuel lines, hot engines, and electrical systems. But here's the brutal paradox once JP-5 is burning in a confined steel space. The thermal energy accumulates faster than ventilation systems can dissipate it. Hangar bay fires involving JP-5 can reach internal temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to warp structural steel within minutes. The fuel that was chosen because it was safer to store becomes, once ignited, nearly impossible to control through conventional means. Every Ford-class carrier hangar bay is equipped with a hangar bay sprinkling system, HBSS, an overhead deluge system engineered to discharge approximately 1,000 gallons of water per minute across designated fire zones. On paper, this is the primary suppression mechanism for large-scale hangar fires. In practice, its activation is one of the most sequentially critical decisions made during a hangar emergency. Water discharge onto a JP-5 fire that is still electrically energized, meaning the hangar's electrical systems have not been properly isolated in the correct sequence risks, creating secondary explosion conditions as electrical arcing intersects with fuel water vapor. The HBSS must be activated in coordination with a precise power isolation checklist. That checklist must be executed correctly under smoke, noise, heat, and the physiological effects of acute stress. The margin for procedural error is effectively zero. This is exactly why the post-Forrestal doctrine, institutionalized through what the Navy now calls casualty control and damage management, or CCDM, mandates that every sailor aboard a carrier, regardless of rate or division, participates in damage control drills a minimum of twice per week, not once a month, not quarterly, twice per week, every week, underway. The philosophy is deliberate in a real hangar fire. Cognitive function under extreme stress degrades rapidly. Decision making slows. Fine motor skills deteriorate. The only reliable human performance under those conditions is deeply rehearsed procedural memory, the kind that lives in muscle, not in thought. The Navy is not drilling sailors to be brave. It is drilling them so that the correct action happens before fear has time to vote. Let that sit for a moment. Twice a week, every week, for an entire deployment that can last 8 months. That is not a training program, that is a philosophy about human fragility in extreme environments. So here's the question worth asking yourself: if you worked in a space where a single mechanical failure could trigger a 1,800-degree fire around parked aircraft loaded with ordnance, would you practice your response every day? Or would you decide the odds were low enough to skip it? After everything you've just seen, the heat, the drills, the 134 names on a memorial that still shapes doctrine today, the obvious question becomes unavoidable. Why do thousands of sailors, having survived one deployment inside this steel world, voluntarily sign up to come back for another? Step back now. Pull the camera all the way out. A single U.S. Navy carrier strike group, built around one aircraft carrier with its escorts of Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, exercises effective military influence over an ocean area exceeding 700,000 square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is roughly twice the land area of the entire state of Montana, covered from a single mobile platform that can reposition at 30-plus knots. When a crisis emerges anywhere in the Pacific, the Atlantic, or the Persian Gulf, the first question asked in the Pentagon Situation Room is almost always the same: where are the carriers that question is answered? Operationally, by what happens inside the hangar bay of each one of those ships every single day. The USS Gerald R. Ford cost approximately $13.3 billion to design, build, and deliver, making it the most expensive warship ever commissioned. Its electromagnetic aircraft launch system replaces steam catapults. Its advanced arresting gear uses water-cooled turbines instead of hydraulic rams. Its dual SAIL-1B nuclear reactors generate 3 times the electrical power of the older Nimitz-class reactors. Every system on this ship represents the absolute cutting edge of naval engineering. And every single one of those systems becomes irrelevant, a $13.3 billion steel island, if the approximately 400 sailors working the hangar bay deck every day stop doing their jobs. The technology does not fly itself. The aircraft do not maintain themselves. The weapons do not load themselves. The hangar bay is where the gap between engineering and capability gets closed by human hands, every hour of every day. The average age of a sailor working the V-3 Division hangar bay is somewhere between 19 and 22 years old. Most of them enlisted directly out of high school. Many of them have never lived away from home before. Consider an aviation structural mechanic, rate AM airman, pay grade E, 320 years old, from a small town outside Indianapolis, Indiana. On his first deployment, he went 47 consecutive days without seeing land, not a beach, not a coastline on the horizon. Nothing but water, steel, and the faces of the people working the same deck alongside him. He troubleshoots stress fractures in aircraft airframes. He works with inspection mirrors and dye-penetrant testing chemicals. He earns a base pay of approximately $2,000 per month. He does not complain about this in any interview, because in his world, complaining about it is not the culture. Here's the most honest thing that can be said about the hangar bay: it is not where the glory happens. The glory happens on the flight deck, the launches, the traps, the arresting wire snapping taut at 150 miles per hour. That is what gets filmed. That is what ends up in recruitment videos and congressional briefings. The hangar bay does not get filmed because nothing telegenic happens there. What happens there is 12-hour shifts of methodical, exacting, physically demanding technical work performed by people whose names will never appear in a press release. The paradox is absolute. The sailors who perform most flawlessly in the hangar bay are precisely the ones you will never hear about, because their success is defined entirely by the absence of failure.
Nobody reports that elevator number 3 functioned correctly for the 400th consecutive time. Nobody writes a story about the FOD walkdown that found a loose fastener before it could enter an engine intake. Every time an F/A 18E Super Hornet launches from the Ford's electromagnetic catapult, accelerating from 0 to 165 miles per hour in approximately 300 feet, a minimum of 127 individual maintenance actions, inspections, and sign offs have been completed on that aircraft in the hours prior, the majority of them in the hangar bay. 127 separate human decisions, each documented, each traceable to a name and a rate and a qualification level. That is not a machine launching. That is a layered human trust system built from the bottom up, executing in a single 2-second catapult stroke. The aircraft is the product, the hangar bay is the factory, and the factory runs on people who chose voluntarily to be exactly where nobody is watching. If this video gave you a new kind of respect for the people behind the machines, leave a like, not for the algorithm.
For the 20-year-old from Indiana who hasn't seen land in 47 days and will never see this video. And if you want to keep pulling back the curtain on the realities of American military power, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.